So, I'm sure a majority of you who frequent my channel or the art sphere have come to be aware of the nonsense surrounding Gumroad banning all NSFW content from their platform. While that is within their right to do so, and set their own rules on their platform, I, for one, find it insulting, especially since they used NSFW artists to grow, and really wouldn't exist without the adult content on their platform. Not only that, but they decided to pass the buck of blame onto Mastercard, claiming that they were given no recourse and a 3-day time limit to remove everything, or else Mastercard would refuse to process their payments. One would be inclined to forgive, but then they had to get on Twitter and start bragging that they'd made $900,000 in revenue in one day, without mentioning that this revenue came from the adult artists using flash sales before they had to remove their content. It comes off as dishonest and disingenuous, but unfortunately, it is the latest in a long line of absolute and utter nonsense thrown at artists of erotica and adult themes in the last few years. I'm wysticlipse, and you're watching my channel where I talk about art, tech, games, and other related topics within the creative sphere. So, if you're interested in that, go ahead and like, subscribe, and hit that bell to be notified of new uploads. Now, on to the defense of erotica as an art form. Should payment processors be able to make these demands of platforms? My answer is no, and I'll tell you why. It started with SESTA and FOSTA, two bills which pushed legal sex work, that is, camming and video content, further into the fringes, and forced some folks back onto the streets. It also had the secondary effect of pushing adult artists who are merely drawing pictures into these same fringes with that same fervor. And now comes COSA, which appears to be what these payment processors and platforms are reacting to. And let's be real, none of these have anything to do with protecting human trafficking victims, seeing as SESTA and FOSTA actually made it harder for victims of human trafficking to come forward, or with protecting kids, because COSA actually makes it harder for kids to access information that would be beneficial to them, such as information on sex ed, which has real material effect of helping to prevent abuse, because it teaches them to recognize what's happening. From that vein, it actually looks pretty bad on the people trying to legislate this. No. What SESTA, FOSTA, and COSA all have in common is censorship. They're bills for mass censorship of the internet, and honestly, as a Mi'kmaqi and Canadian citizen, I am sick and tired of these laws of a country I'm not even living in, and that I have no say in controlling what I can do online in my own time. Censorship is the point, and it gives payment processors and governments, specifically in the US, a complete monopoly over who can choose what other people can do and look at. In the art sphere, this limits freedom of expression from sex workers and artists. As long as the services artists and sex workers are providing are legal and consenting, individuals should have the right to engage with it, enjoy it, and support it financially without the creators having to experience hardship. Adults should be allowed the autonomy to choose what they want to look at, as long as those materials are, of course, not harming any real people. By restricting payment options, processors like Mastercard, Visa, and PayPal are effectively forcing their moral standards on individuals. It is an infringement of our legal self-expression. Even people in countries not governed by them suffer. It also leads to a slippery slope. And although I hate using the slippery slope, we've already seen it in action, as purges of NSFW content inevitably don't just target what the payment processors consider pornographic. It also ends up affecting everyone. Random people's selfies for showing too much cleavage, or drawings of completely clothed cartoon characters who both happen to be women kissing. Currently on Bluesky, the AI moderation bot cannot differentiate between a sex act and a picture of a naked Barbie doll just standing on its pedestal, and it ends up unilaterally labeling both as porn. I saw it in action with the strike-through on LiveJournal, where communities about EGL fashion and CSA survivor support groups were hit with bans for being pornographic, just as much as fanfic and art communities were. And we saw it in action on Tumblr with the NSFW ban, where their bot was flagging photos of sand dunes as porn. The fact of the matter is, no matter how kinky or gross, censorship is wrong. As long as nobody is being harmed, and no, it makes me feel icky does not constitute being harmed, then payment processors have no right to dictate what we are allowed to draw, or what we're allowed to look at, and what we're allowed to pay for. If I want to buy a picture of Rouge the Bat, wide as she is tall, with Bahamas to match, smoking a fat blunt while enjoying a bad dragon product, I should be allowed to do that. No ifs, ands, or buts. PayPal, Mastercard, and Visa should not have the right to infringe upon my life if what I am creating, selling, or buying is entirely legal to create, sell, or possess. That's it. That's the whole video. Don't look at the timestamp. Oh boy. I can already tell this is going to get divisive. Most reasonable people will stop here, but I know there's going to be some in the audience who say, oh, but what if some kid sees it? But sex is icky. But those kinks are bad and gross. To which I say, too bad. Not my problem. Let's first address the elephant in the room. Kids seeing sexy art. Kids see sexy stuff all the time. On TV, in magazines, on the side of the bus. This isn't new or special. More importantly, an artist or sex worker does not have an obligation to reasonably keep kids and unconsenting adults from seeing their work. The key word here is reasonably. If I put an 18 mark on my display name and social media bio, and if I flag my profile as 18 plus, and I flag every picture I create with relevant tags that warn people what it's about, and some snotty kid clicks through and is upset he saw a boob, well, that's not my problem. I've done my due diligence within the confines of what is literally the limit of the technology. Monitor your kids and keep them off social media if you're so concerned. That's your job as a parent. Places like Neopets and Gaia Online still exist. Send them there. What is not reasonable is requiring a photo ID to access sites that contain so-called adult content. Not only does this pose the question of who determines what content is or isn't adult, and many politicians pushing these laws have come out and outright stated that they'll be blanketing literally anything LGBT or about women's medical information as adult, but it also runs the risk of security. Sites aren't just railing against this kind of thing because it's wrong, but also because it's a massive security and privacy risk. There's no safe way to check IDs online without the risk of identity theft and tracking. If they use an on-site service, they have to devote database space for either storing the IDs or deleting them, and in the case of the latter, what was the point? And in the case of the former, anyone can be hacked. If they use an off-site service, they have no guarantee that the service is telling the truth, and that the IDs are stored securely or deleted. Take the recent case of AT&T, for example. I'll link an article about that down below. 73 million current and former customers had their personal information leaked onto the dark web. Everything from addresses to security questions to social insurance numbers. If one of the biggest financial institutions in the business world worldwide cannot keep your information secure, why should we trust that any random site dedicated to grannies taking pudding baths and laundry would be able to? But for the other half of the audience still making excuses, the sex is icky crowd, who think that depiction is always endorsement, and any form of kink, like vor or BDSM, means that the creator wants to be a cannibal or is secretly an abuser just waiting to strike. Well, this is partially for you, but mostly for me, because the rest of this video is a love letter to erotica and other subversive forms of art and writing. Yes, even OnlyFans creators, they're artists too. I read Flowers in the Attic when I was 11 years old. I was reading my mom's romance novel collection by the time I was 9. I had run out of things my own age to read, and honestly, they were boring to me. It took me a long time to learn to read. I was well into 3rd grade by the time I learned, actually. But when I did, I was voracious. Apparently, this isn't an uncommon experience for autistic and ADHD kids, but I digress. When I asked my mom to read her books, she sat me down for a discussion, and it went something like this. Hey Mom, can I read this? Okay, Wisty, are you sure you're ready for it? You know that these aren't real, right? And you shouldn't try to imitate anything in these books? Yeah, duh! And if you do have any questions about anything in them, you can come to me. Yeah. And voila. Like that, I was given free rein to read whatever the hell I wanted. If something in a book upset me, I would talk about it with my mom. She would then decide whether I should put it down and wait to come back to it, or if I should talk through what was upsetting and get to the root of why. Usually, it was the latter. And when I say these books were racy, I mean they were racy. A lot of the characters and couples were toxic and abusive. They featured situations that would not fly today. Some I would retroactively, if it were my choice, redistribute into the horror section rather than the romance section. But I always accepted that if I didn't like something, I could just close the book, turn it off, and it wouldn't bother me anymore. There's something that parents need to be teaching their kids today, and something that a whole lot of adults need to be learning too. Because just because it disgusts you, doesn't mean it doesn't have the right to exist. Yes, even if that toxic relationship really is just wank fodder for someone. Because most people reading that kind of content, watching those kinds of shows, or looking at that kind of art, don't actually want that for themselves in real life. They're just invested in a good story or fantasy, and there's nothing wrong with that. Because I know where this kind of censorship leads. I've seen it before. On LiveJournal, on fanfiction.net, on Tumblr, and now on Gumroad. I've seen people get angry at Hilda by Diane Bryars for enabling fat fetishists, which, honestly, even if it was, why exactly is that a problem? It seems like the internet lately has been leaning into an all kink it's bad, which most of the time ends up having a reverse effect where any depiction of someone outside the norm immediately gets written off as fetish, for no real good reason, which just ends up feeding into the stigmatization of different genders, body types, ethnicities, and traits. And while I concede that I do find some of these subjects personally objectionable, or just objectively wrong or disgusting, such as the Queen of Spades thing, and don't look that up if you don't want to have a bad day, I still hesitate to call for their removal or censorship, because once you go down that road, how do you know when to stop? My, or anyone's personal sense of disgust, should not be the line from which we draw all morality. Down that road lies the gay or trans panic legal defense. On the Japanese internet, I have seen folks talk about the concept of internet self-defense, where instead of demanding everyone bow down to you and your sensibilities, you simply make use of the moderation tools at your disposal to block, mute, or elsewise work to avoid encountering the things that are going to be upsetting to you. I consider this the same concept as putting the book down. Unfortunately, too many people on our side of the web seem to have some kind of issue with being blocked and muted, even if it's nothing personal. I can understand if that was someone you thought of as a friend, but come on. Being blocked by some random stranger you've never spoken to is not the end of the world, guys. And again, even if it was just for fetishistic gratification, why is that a bad thing? Sex is almost universal. There are some people who will never have it or want it. There are asexual people, yes, but the vast majority of people are going to experience sex or something near to it at some point in their lives. Sex evokes adoration, passion, understanding, but also fear, pain, yearning, and boiling rage. I posit that sex is just as important and valid to portray as any other subject matter, as beautiful as a sprawling sunset or as horrifying as a dark abyss. It all comes down to context. Sex in art is, in my opinion, beautiful, regardless if it's some kind of hentai about a guy whose right hand turned into a cute girl, or a painting by Michelangelo. Erotica as an art form dates back to the earliest parts of civilization, and when I say the earliest parts of civilization, I mean we have cave paintings that depict sex and erotica. We have little statuettes carved from stone with rudimentary tools, some of which may even be made by women as self-portraits. We have houses in ancient Greece, where you could go to clean your clothes, get a haircut, get a shave, eat a good meal, look at some erotic art, and maybe even shack up with a courtesan. We have stories of sordid affairs preserved from as far back as biblical times, and all of these things are important, not only because they tie us to our past as humans and people and prove that we're not so different, but they tell us a lot about history and the culture of their times. Renaissance art is sexy and subversive. Let's take all of the many depictions of Leda and the Swan. Due to language barriers between now and then, even those who know and speak ancient Greek cannot tell you for sure whether that union was consensual or not in its original context. After all, our word I'm not allowed to say on YouTube has, in fact, had many definitions over time. That being said, the myth as a subject of romance and eroticism has penetrated, no pun intended, into common consciousness even now, and remains a popular subject of painting, typically with the mortal woman Leda tenderly embracing a swan, which in this case is a transformed Zeus, with their children or eggs in the background. You can find dozens of versions of this subject by dozens of different painters on your average trip to the museum. These paintings are gorgeous, full of life and color, and usually don't depict more than bare breasts. But there's still people in modern times clutching their pearls to have it censored. Am I saying that your average Twitter hentai artist is on the same level as Renaissance painters depicting Leda on the Swan? Well, yes, actually, and no. Even Renaissance painters could do lowbrow concepts, stuff you might even find on Twitter today. Take young Greeks attending a cockfight by Jean-Léon Gérôme in 1846. It depicts a nude man and a barely covered woman who has her whole cat out, watching two roosters fight. One would be hard-pressed to argue that this is sophisticated subject matter, and I, for one, find the painting as funny as it is suggestive and beautiful. Just because styles and methods of application have changed, doesn't mean that the artwork lacks artistic merit. Sex, in many forms, is beautiful, interesting, thought-provoking, and important, which is why, even when faced with subject matter that's just not for me, whether it's a case of your kink is not my kink and that's okay, or something that I actually find triggering and problematic, I try to stop and think of what merits the works might have, and who it might be for. What makes me feel disgusted might make someone else feel seen and heard in a way that they hadn't before. That's the power of art, and to scrub our world of everything that could be subversive or controversial, if it's not making people in business suits who play the stock market like checkers money, is doing a disservice to society as a whole. Children are going to learn about sex sooner or later, most often from their friends in school, as was in my case, and wouldn't you rather help them establish healthy boundaries than go into their adult life sheltered and knowing nothing? We have study after study that proves that people who enter adult life without being exposed to sex, whether that be in art, media, sex education, are more likely to end up in toxic and abusive situations, end up teen parents, or worse. I was actually having a conversation with my good friend Galatunia, thank you for helping me proofread the script, by the way, who actually brought up a really good point about this particular subject. The kids are gonna find this stuff anyway. When I was a kid, we were raised by TV. We had a constant stream of curated content filtered at us 24/7, and the parents actually rarely had to worry about whether what they were letting us watch would be appropriate or not. Although, let's not get into the YTV kids slime bugs incident that absolutely traumatized me. I still have nightmares about it today. But in the current day, as Galatunia said, it cannot be overstated that you can't do that. They will find porn. Because there's no team of content regulators or executives tracking a very limited stream of content to a target audience. Your kid can be fed anything online, at any time, anywhere, no matter how much you scream and cry and stomp your foot that something just shouldn't be made. It will exist. You have to curate your kid's screen time. Like, listen, when I was a kid, even though we had all this curated content being fed to us like the world's worst morphine drip, we still actually went out of our way to find sexual content, even when we didn't even really understand what sex was. It was a pretty common sleepover activity to grab the TV antennas and see if we could get those saucy channels and try to make out boobs through the TV snow. Kids are gonna search out and find this stuff regardless. And the only actually reasonable way to deal with it is by having these difficult conversations with them. The solution to children might see it and be traumatized, the fact that most people using a "but think of the children" argument don't actually care about children aside, isn't blanket banning anything that a bank owner thinks is icky, but rather to bolster and promote a culture of media literacy, open communication about why we feel the way we feel about things, and encourage children and adults to examine their biases, feelings, and reactions with a discerning eye. Relegating sex workers and subversive artists to the absolute fringes of society, and even removing their ability to reasonably and safely get paid, only further damages vulnerable populations, while doing nothing to protect the online safety of children. But that's all just my opinion. Feel free to debate in the comments below, but if I see any bigotry, I'll be deleting it. I make videos roughly every other week, give or take, about topics relating to art, video games, VTubers, and tech, so drop in again sometime. Bye for now.